Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts beseeching us, the true North strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand unborn for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets with them, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, take us that star-spangled banner yet wave, for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Welcome to the Jewish Federations of North America's 2021 General Assembly. Thank you for joining us. The program will now begin.
I'm Carolyn Gitlin, and I am from Hartford, Connecticut.
Hi, I'm Sintra Pollock, and I am in Denver, Colorado.
Hi, I'm Ari Ackerman, and I'm from New York City.
I felt that it was important for me to join in this year's GA because when we come together as a global Jewish community, we're able to make real progress in making sure that we have a sustained Jewish life.
The Jewish Federation is at the forefront of helping us affect change in our world.
I have witnessed how the Jewish Federations of North America and their partner agencies literally save Jewish lives around the world.
And it's important to remember that no community is an island unto itself.
I'm here because now is not the time to hide.
I think there's literally no substitute for the feeling that the GA creates a community.
Now more than ever, I have a greater appreciation for the power of the collective strength of our Jewish community.
As Jewish community leaders and as a community, we help shape what's next for our community by getting involved and using our voices.
We ask people who are on the ground what affects them and get real-time feedback to know what we should do.
We help secure the Jewish future through standing up for what is right and just.
By identifying ways to build bridges, expand the tent, find more ways to engage those diverse in thought, action, beliefs, culture, and visibility.
Because as Jews, we are responsible for one another.
As Jewish leaders, we need to show the community that we are able to care for the most vulnerable and help people reconnect to Jewish life.
To frame problems, to seek solutions, and to think about the ways that we work together.
And together, the entire Federation system is stronger.
This community
has the power
to overcome
any obstacle.
I am proud
to be part
of this
General Assembly.
Please welcome this year's GA chairs, Anne and Jeremy Pava.
Hello, everyone. Jeremy and I are honored and privileged to welcome you all to the 2021 Virtual General Assembly. Our theme this year is What's Next? A theme we think is especially appropriate in this moment of uncertainty. I had hoped beyond hope that we would be able to come together in person, but when that was not possible, thanks to the miracle of technology, we still have the opportunity to come together from across the globe to address the critical challenges that face the Jewish community.
We want to give a heartfelt thank you to the GA Committee, who navigated many obstacles to make this unique global event possible. We have so many people from so many countries around the world participating with us today. It is incredibly exciting to be coming together as a community with all of you.
Over the last year, the Jewish community has shown once again that we can meet any challenge. We are so proud of the 146 Jewish federations and dozens of independent communities that make up our federation system. We also thank all our wonderful organizational partners with whom we have worked. Together, we successfully addressed the needs of the community and overcame what seemed like insurmountable challenges.
Yet there is so much more to do. While dealing with the pandemic remains high on our communal agenda, so many other pressing needs require our attention. First, while security threats to Jews in North America were already on the rise before the pandemic, Israel's defensive response to Hamas's unprovoked missile barrage fired at Israeli civilians generated a wave of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel activity in North America and around the world at a level of intensity we had not previously experienced. Next, the murder of George Floyd and other similar incidents remind us of our obligation as a community to work for diversity and inclusion. I am personally inspired in this work by a photograph I have hanging in my office of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching hand in hand with Martin Luther King in Selma. Finally, even though summer camps and some Israel trips occurred this past year, participation was significantly curtailed. It is estimated that over 100,000 young people lost the opportunity to travel to Israel over the past year. The lack of identity-building experiences, whether in Israel, at camp, or on college campuses, represents a huge loss for the Jewish community. We need a renewed focus to overcome this loss by redoubling our efforts to strengthen in-person Jewish connections on campus, at camp, and through Israel trips and programs.
Even though we are still unable to be in one room as we had hoped, we are determined to move our multifaceted and important communal agenda forward. There is, of course, no secret to why we have achieved so much this past year and why we have the potential to do so again this year. Our power is in our collective action. When we work together, we accomplish anything we set our minds to. And when we collaborate, we inspire the creativity that is so critical to developing new solutions and new approaches. We are excited to explore the theme of what's next with you over the next hour. And immediately, in this moment, what's next is that I have the great pleasure of introducing our most esteemed community member. Please welcome the chairman of the board of directors of the Jewish Federations of North America, Mark Wilf.
Thank you, Ann and Jeremy, for that warm welcome. I'm proud and honored to be here with you today. Each of you are part of an incredible gathering of thousands of Federation stakeholders, partners, and friends representing 146 local federations, dozens of network communities, and our continental and global partners. Over the last year, in fact, over the last 18 months, we have proven beyond a doubt the power of our system and the power of our assembly, even when we can only assemble virtually. Ann and Jeremy laid out clearly the challenges and opportunities of our communal agenda as we look ahead to the coming year. I am confident that we will meet these challenges and take advantage of these opportunities because I have seen firsthand the remarkable work of our federations and our partners. Last May, when thousands of rockets rained down on Israel, we were there to help alleviate the suffering and to quickly repair and rebuild the damage through our partnerships and support of the Jewish Agency, JDC, the Israel Trauma Coalition, and more. In July, 250 cabinet members and alumni from across 50 states gathered in our nation's capital and made a commitment to take action against growing anti-Semitism and to proclaim our community's unequivocal pride in being Jewish. Our federations have steadily increased the scope and sophistication of our community security initiatives and have worked with our government leaders to increase public support. Today, 45 federations have such initiatives, committing approximately $30 million per year in philanthropic funds and accessing additional millions in government funds. But the threats have grown. As you will hear later in the program, we are urgently working to make sure every community has a state-of-the-art community security initiative. And we never forget those who need our help the most. From September to December of last year, as the pandemic dragged on and the government's response was tied up, our federation system, together with our foundation partners, raised $62 million in additional support for the frontline Jewish human services agencies to help the most vulnerable. So what's next? How do we maintain our focus on the urgent agenda of today while rebuilding the Jewish engagement moments that have been lost and imagining a whole new set of opportunities to help our communities flourish? We won't accomplish everything in this short virtual General Assembly that we would accomplish if we could continue the conversations in the halls and the receptions at night. I will miss that as much as you will, but we can start. And most importantly, we can remember and be inspired by the power to change the world that is in our collective hands. Right now, it is my privilege to introduce someone who is at the forefront of building diverse, inclusive Jewish communities. Please welcome Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann, founder of Mishkan Chicago. I hope to see you all in person soon.
ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם ואנחנו נברך ימי
אתה ועד עולם, ועשו לי מקדש ושכנתי בתוכם, ואנחנו נברך ים מעתה ועד עולם. Shana Tova. Welcome. Very honored to be asked to sing and say a little something about this mitzvah of Hakel that is the theme of the GA this year. And what an awesome opportunity to learn a little bit more about a mitzvah that is so important and so under talked about. What the song I just sang, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, it comes from a line in Exodus where God in the Torah says to the people, build a space for me and I will dwell not in it, but in you, in those who build it. And in that same spirit, we're instructed in the book of Deuteronomy to gather every 7 years in the Shemitah year, which is like now, and to hear the Torah read. And the Torah is really specific about who is included, and it's everyone. Just like the mitzvah of constructing the Mishkan. It's men and women and children. It's everybody giving something, bringing something, being represented. And with this mitzvah of Hakel too, you know, the Torah isn't always so maximally inclusive, but it almost goes out of its way, you know, in a book that doesn't waste a single word to say men and women and children and the strangers in your midst every 7 years. The implication being not everyone was here the last time it was read. And we really want everybody to be present. And, you know, if you can do it every 7 years, great, Dayenu. But you know what? I think the implication is like, if you could do it even more often than that, even better, even better. And as the Torah invites this maximally inclusive group of people to show up, you know, it's sort of saying, we know there were certain people who weren't here to hear this the last time. Or you know what? Maybe they were here and we didn't hear them. Maybe there are certain people who have been present all along and we haven't been hearing their voices. And in this year, on the heels of the groundbreaking Jews of Color survey and the 2020 Jews in America portrait from the Pew Center, you know, we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that there are people who have been in the community but on the margins, or in the community in plain sight, and whose voices haven't been heard. And the mitzvah of Hakel is an invitation to hear the voices of the people who weren't represented the last time we did this whole gathering. You know, now we are awake to those voices and to the presence of people whose voices we might not have heard last time. And I think that sounds really good. That's, you know, great. I want to hear more voices. I'm so open-minded. But what happens when you start to hear voices that you're not used to hearing is maybe you hear something that makes you uncomfortable. Each one of us may encounter when we hear the voices that maybe haven't been present or that we haven't heard before, something that implicates us in a solution to someone else's problem or to someone else's challenge. And so this is an invitation really to all of us to stand up and say, like, I am here. I am here for you, and I hope you're here for me. How can we begin to solve big problems together as a community? And I think that's really what the GA is about. And I bless the conversations that you'll have and the listening that you'll do and the togetherness that is happening in this very moment in the spirit of this mitzvah. Shana Tova.
Please welcome Susie Stern, the chair of the Lay Leadership Development Committee of the Jewish Federations of North America.
Congressman Torres, Richie Torres, thank you for taking the time out today of your incredibly busy schedule to join us today. As a New Yorker, I am proud to call you my hometown congressman, although I little south of you. But what some of our audience may not know is that you represent the poorest congressional district in the country in the South Bronx, a district of many immigrants whose needs from public housing to good schools were the reason that you decided to run in the first place. You have said your constituents are concerned with bread and butter, health and housing, and schools and jobs. As you know, I hope, you are speaking to several thousand Jewish leaders across the country. Many of us are big fans for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the remarkably public pro-Israel position you have taken, even when that is unpopular in some corners of the Twitter sphere that otherwise supports the progressive values that define your political career. You have been quite vocal about your views and quite courageous when it mattered, like the recent vote on the Iron Dome funding. My question is, why is it so important to you to take this stand, and what impact is this having on the debate?
Well, first, it's an honor to be here. I feel like all of us in public life have an obligation to speak out forcefully against extremism, no matter what form it takes. And I worry about a phenomenon that I call the Jeremy Corbynization of politics in America. For me, the experience of British politics, the rise of a demagogue like Jeremy Corbyn, is a cautionary tale of what could happen when anti-Semitism infects the bloodstream of a nation's politics. And I feel all of us have an obligation to ensure that extremism is fought at every turn and in every form. And I worry about the rise of the BDS movement. One of the most influential ideas in American politics is the idea of intersectionality, the notion that you cannot be both pro-Israel and progressive, which I consider a vicious lie. But it's a powerfully influential idea. I've gone to criminal justice reform rallies where the following words were spoken from Ferguson to Palestine. I've gone to immigration reform rallies where someone has uttered the words, "No wall from Mexico to Palestine." And as a rational human being, you would ask, what does Israel have to do with Mexico or Ferguson? And the answer is nothing. But there's a concerted effort by the BDS movement to make everything about Israel, to turn every progressive cause into a delegitimation campaign against Israel. And I consider BDS to be an insidious form of anti-Semitism. And when you see something wrong, I feel like you should say something. I'm reminded of a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "The greatest tragedy, history will record that the greatest tragedy was not the striding clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people." And I refuse to be appallingly silent. I feel I have an obligation to be forceful in taking a stand against anti-Semitism in our own country.
Thank you for your answer. I'd love to hear how you developed such a passion for Israel.
Yeah, so in 2014, when I was a city council member, I was invited by JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, to join a council delegation to Israel, which was the first time I had an opportunity to travel abroad. And when I went to Israel, it was a transformative experience. I went to Yad Vashem, went to the Masada, Sderot. I met with families who lived in fear of rocket fire. I saw the bomb shelters, and it occurred to me that there's nothing in the American experience that's remotely comparable to the volatility that confronts Israel. There's no one in the United States who lives in fear of rocket fire. We in the United States are comfortably guarded by two oceans. We're surrounded by peaceful neighbors, whereas Israel is largely surrounded by hostile countries and has to deal with terrorist organizations, including Hamas, and has to face relentless rocket fire. And so that the experience of going to Israel, going to Sderot and meeting with families who live in fear of rocket fire, gave me a much deeper appreciation for the unique security challenges that affect the Jewish state.
Thank you. Beautiful. You talked a little bit about BDS. The way that Israel is attacked and delegitimized is obviously very painful, and our community has a history of working with other communities to combat racism, and hatred, and to serve those in need, and advocate for things like food pantries and housing supports and healthcare that serves anyone who needs it. And yet sometimes these other communal organizations include an anti-Israel plank in their platform. And it's not clear that it's been fully debated or all the history of the issue is understood. You have often talked about the difference between the focus of communities on the ground versus the more ideological positioning that prevails in politics. Do you think that the traditional coalitions among religious leaders or human service agencies and neighbors can persist despite the polemic sound bites by some elected leaders and social media opinion makers?
I see the BDS movement as a threat to coalition building, and it's meant to be a threat. That's not an accident. That's the intended result. So the purpose of BDS is not to critique Israel. No one's against criticism. Like, criticism of any country is fair game. But what's often directed against Israel is not criticism. It's extremism. It's delegitimation. There's a concerted effort by the BDS movement to isolate the state of Israel as a pariah and to exclude pro-Israel Jews from the larger progressive movement. And we've seen it unfold in a number of settings. One example is there have been several pride parades that have prohibited people from waving a rainbow flag featuring the Star of David. So that's one example of how anti-Zionism, which is its own form of anti-Semitism, can easily bleed into old-fashioned anti-Semitism. So I worry that the delegitimation campaign, the warfare that has been waged by the BDS movement, could threaten coalition building among organizations that otherwise would have a common purpose.
We have work to do.
We have work to do. It's winnable. This is a winnable battle.
That's what I want to hear. Okay. The New York Times' Bret Stephens has called you dazzlingly smart, and I agree. And I have one more question to ask you. As I said, you are speaking to Jewish leadership across the country. I'd like to know what your call to action for us as Jews and as Americans.
My philosophy in life, if we do nothing, then nothing will change. And rather than stand by idly on the sidelines and complain, we have to become the change that we wish to see in the world, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi. We are sitting on a powder keg of anti-Semitism, and the Jewish community and all of us cannot afford to be complacent. We saw in the month of May how the amplification of anti-Semitism on social media led to a global outbreak of anti-Semitic vitriol and violence and vandalism, which is a wake-up call that the Jewish community cannot afford to be complacent. It has to be politically active. It has to fight anti-Semitism in every form that it takes. The stakes are high, and we have to fight it with the fierce urgency of now.
Thank you. And really, thank you so much for taking time. I think all of us feel we are glad we have an ally in you and your leadership. I know that I speak for all the people listening today that we are inspired by what you say and wish you strength as you go forward with your work on behalf of the American people. I think you inspire us to action. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today, and thank you for your service to this country.
It was an honor to be here. Take care.
Now, it is an honor to introduce Nikki R. Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations from 2017 to 2019.
Hi, I'm Nikki Haley. It's a privilege to address the General Assembly. No matter where you're watching this, thank you for tuning in. More importantly, thank you for being a part of this incredible community. That's what I want to talk about, community. Its power, the need to protect it, and the work that you are doing on that front. You're no strangers to community's power. For nearly 100 years, you've served and strengthened North America's Jewish communities. Wherever they are, you're there too. Wherever they go, you go with them. The Jewish community defies both time and place. It extends through history. It expands across the continent and far beyond. Together, you do the hard work of solving problems from the smallest local issues to the biggest national challenges. It's the best of the Jewish tradition and the best of the American tradition of neighbors helping neighbors. It's beautiful, it's powerful, I have the deepest respect for what you do. Your work is always important. It's also becoming more urgent, especially when it comes to protecting Jewish communities from harm. The ancient evil of anti-Semitism is on the rise. I encountered this sad reality at the United Nations. Hateful governments like Iran didn't even bother to hide their hostility toward Jews. I heard it in their words. I saw it in their deeds. Other countries were more subtle. They didn't go after the Jewish people. Instead, they went after the Jewish state. No other country faces so many insults. No other country is singled out for such attack. Of course, they say it's just about opposing Zionism. Well, you and I know the truth. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's not just the UN hatred towards Jews that's on the rise, it's worldwide. Anti-Semitism saw a huge spike in 2019. Things got even worse in 2020. I was especially disgusted by the lie that Jews created the coronavirus and somehow profited from it. That ugly claim that got traction, it's proof that we're surrounded by a moral pandemic too. The lies and accusations are bad enough, but what starts with accusations doesn't stop there. Hate speech often leads to hateful actions. A case in point is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. What was once a fad on college campuses is now openly advocated at the highest levels of government. It's more popular than ever and as dangerous as ever. While BDS claims to be about justice, it's a blatant attempt to starve Israel of funding, friends, and a future. That has no place in America or anywhere else. I say that as the first governor to sign a bill banning BDS. The worst attacks aren't verbal or legislative. They're physical attacks and acts of violence. Those are on the rise too. In May alone, violence against Jews more than doubled. One recent study found that 2/3 of Jewish college students no longer feel safe on campus. A stunning 70% encountered anti-Semitism this year alone. I'm baffled that anti-Semitism is often seen as somehow different from racism or other forms of bigotry. It's exactly the same. We should never accept it. We should always call it what it is, and we should always punish those who perpetrate it. There's an urgent need to protect Jewish communities. It's true in North America. It's just as true in Israel. I traveled there just a few weeks after the fighting ended in the latest battle with the Hamas terrorists. For 11 long days, Israelis faced constant violence and rocket attacks. I was in a neighborhood that got hit hard. I stopped at the home of a Holocaust survivor, or at least what was left of it. I hoped to meet her, but she was in the hospital. Her caretaker was killed. The rocket that destroyed her house nearly killed her. As I stood in the street looking at her house, a neighbor came into the street. She started waving. She started screaming. She crawled across the rubble to meet me. Then she did something I didn't expect. She gave me a hug. She said, "You have to come see my home." Security didn't appreciate it too much, but I went. I met her husband, a military veteran. He couldn't stop sobbing. He had defended so many people and so many lives, but he couldn't defend his own home. They walked us through the ruins. The woman said when the sirens went off, she grabbed her baby grandson to hold him tight. Right as she did, the blast hit. She was thrown into the wall, and she showed it to me. I could see her hair still buried there. Even though her home was destroyed, all that woman could talk about was God's grace. She kept saying, God saved me. God saved my grandson. I'll never forget it. I left with an even stronger conviction to stand with Israel. But I also walked away with a deeper appreciation for the strength of Israel and all the Jewish people. Despite all it has faced and all it faces, Israel endures. Israel is moving forward. It continues to inspire the world with incredible advances and human achievements. It's also moving closer to a lasting peace, thanks to the Abraham Accords. There are those who said it couldn't be done. Now it's happening before our eyes. Israel is bravely leading the Middle East into a brighter future. By the same token, in North America, Jewish communities are pillars of courage. Despite all that's happening, all the anger and attacks, you refuse to be silenced. Just the opposite. You're speaking out and standing strong. You're protecting one another while rallying others to do what's right and fight what's wrong. No matter how hard they try, the haters won't win. They can't beat you. You have the truth and justice on your side. For that matter, you have a whole lot of allies, myself included. It's my honor to stand with you. I have faith that Jewish communities will come through this difficult time and even emerge stronger. You have my commitment to work with you to reach that day, and when we do, we'll celebrate together. Thank you, and God bless you.
To introduce our next segment, please welcome Bar Yefet Cohen, a 2021 Jewish Changemakers Fellow.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here and to be part of what's next for the Jewish community. I'm joining you today from Israel, where right now I'm studying at the Open University in Tel Aviv. It's an incredible opportunity, and it follows another incredible opportunity I had this summer. I was selected to participate as a Jewish Changemakers Fellow, a program designed by the Jewish Federations of North America to engage and begin the leadership journey for young Jews ages 20 to 25, as one of the hundreds of young Jewish leaders who took part in this program. Through Jewish Changemakers, I was part of a global cohort of young Jews, all of whom are committed to their Judaism and to creating positive change in the world. I made connections and friendships I never would have made otherwise. And I'm so grateful to the Jewish community and Jewish federations for that opportunity. I'm extremely passionate about Israel engagement and education. Throughout my life, I've taken part in many different Israeli advocacy programs. During the pandemic, I founded Israel Through the Looking Glass, an initiative dedicated to promoting Israeli education in Jewish communities across the globe through online Zoom presentations and workshops. I'm also passionate about social impact, tikkun olam, and so I donate a ma'aser of all our profits every month to different educational endeavors in Israel. It is a great privilege to have the opportunity to thank all of you who made this life-changing program possible for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, I'm honored to introduce the co-chair of the Changemakers Fellowship Advisory Committee, Rena Koppelman. It's because of her vision and commitment to the next generation of young leaders that thousands of young changemakers had the opportunity to begin their leadership journey. Thank you, Rena, and thank you to your co-chair, Jason, and the entire committee, and really everyone across the system who supports Jewish changemakers. We will make you proud. And now, I'll pass it on to you, Rena.
Bar, thank you for that warm welcome. I am honored to co-chair the Incredible Changemakers program and watch all of you venture into your leadership journey.
Now joining us, Eric Fingerhut, the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America.
My wife Amy and I have a favorite joke. A man says to his friend, "You know what? I'm an optimist." The friend says, "If you're an optimist, why are you so worried?" The man replies, "You think it's easy being an optimist?" Whenever we get too worried about one problem or another, Amy or I will look at the other and say, "You think it's easy being an optimist?" It's a reminder to us to keep looking at the big picture, which is always brighter than any narrow look at the world. Now, truthfully, it hasn't been easy being an optimist lately. We face enormous challenges, which can make it difficult to maintain a positive outlook. There are, of course, the big burning questions on all of our minds as members of the broader society in which we live. What are the right protocols for how we should gather, work, or socialize in the face of the lingering COVID virus? How do we acknowledge the progress that has been made on issues of diversity and inclusion, while also addressing the barriers that remain? How do we balance our commitment to being an open and welcoming society with the need to protect ourselves from those who would do us harm? And no less crucially, we have our own uniquely Jewish concerns. How do we fight back against the rising tide of anti-Semitism? How do we teach our children to love Israel as we do and to feel a part of the global Jewish people? How do we forge an unbreakable link in the 4,000-year chain of Jewish history, passing on our beliefs, practices, and traditions to the next generation? Well, like the man in the joke, I am an optimist. Why? The answer is community. When I think about who I am and what I believe, I understand that it is my community that made me this way. I'm a patriotic American. I'm inspired by the words of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence and the sight of the Capitol dome at night, and by all those who have given their lives to defend our democracy. But even more so, I'm a patriot because of the impression that was formed on me watching the annual Memorial Day parades in our community, and by sitting on the lawn during our community's fireworks every 4th of July, and because I saw my father, a World War II veteran, stand at attention while the bugles blew taps. Similarly, I love Judaism. I appreciate that I am part of the covenant created at Mount Sinai and have the obligation to study Torah and to do my best to fulfill its teachings and precepts. But even more so, I love Judaism because our home was filled with warmth and love every Friday night and every Pesach and every Hanukkah, and because a Jewish educator met with my friends and me every Saturday morning at our community Hebrew school and taught us the basics of Jewish prayer, and because of the youth group activities that our synagogue sponsored and the community events we attended at the JCC. And I'm a Zionist. I am inspired by Herzl and Ben-Gurion and by the miraculous successes of the modern State of Israel. But even more so, I'm a Zionist because my family joined in when the community held walkathons for Israel and staged Yom HaAtzmaut concerts in the park across the street from our house. And because I have certificates stating that trees were planted in Israel in honor of my bar mitzvah. And because my mother, widowed at a young age, applied for scholarships from the Federation and borrowed money from the Hebrew Free Loan to send my sisters and me to Israel on high school trips. And I'm a Zionist because on Yom Kippur in 1973, as word spread that Israel was under attack, I watched as our synagogue service turned into a fundraising drive led by the Jewish professionals who were there to pray, but who knew exactly what to do without being told. Now, our sages understood this phenomenon well. The Talmud tells us that we should live only in communities that are sufficiently large to have a synagogue, a charity fund, a court, a doctor, and kosher food. And every community is required to provide schools to educate their children. And when we give tzedakah, we start with the needy in our own city and then gradually move outward to support others in need. Now, I'm not naive. I know that our communities are not now, nor have they ever been perfect. We have let too many people slip through the cracks, unnoticed or unserved. We have not always been there when people needed us the most. We have sometimes struggled to keep up with the ever-changing character of the Jewish community. I also know that not everyone has positive Jewish experiences when they are young, and that it is never too late to be introduced to the Jewish tradition or to be imbued with the spirit of Zionism. That is why our communal efforts must never cease, and that neither age nor background can be allowed to be a barrier to entry. This is a different time. The internet and the pandemic have shown us that we can connect to each other regularly across great distances, not just across town. This talk is airing, after all, at our virtual General Assembly. But no matter how many hours we spend online or how many join our virtual events, it's not the same as being next door or down the street or across town from each other. So even as we invest millions in fighting the hate that reaches our children over social media, and even as we rally to help the marginalized across the globe, let us remember that our first and our best investment is in our communal infrastructure that we have spent decades building and then constantly adapting and readapting to the demands of the moment. What makes me an optimist is that our Jewish camps were filled with joy and laughter and song this past summer, and that our day schools are open and safe and teaching our children with skill and love. What makes me an optimist is that with our children finally back at college, our Hillels and Chabad houses were full to overflowing for the opening barbecues and the first Shabbat of the year and the high holidays. What makes me an optimist is that with Birthright Israel and Honeymoon Israel and Route 1 and more ready to restart trips, that young adults and young couples are being recruited to go to Israel and are signing up in great numbers. What makes me an optimist is that last year, as the pandemic was raging and we knew that our human services agencies providing mental health services and vocational services and cash assistance were under great stress, we raised a national matching fund of $18 million from generous foundations and individual donors. And over 100 federations and thousands of donors turned that $18 million match into $62 million. And that in just the last 4 months of 2020, 100% of that magnificent sum was sent to our frontline service providers across the continent. And that this was just one of many examples of the leadership and generosity of federations, foundations, and so many individual donors that carried us through the challenges of the last 18 months. What makes me an optimist is that 45 federations have built community security initiatives to ensure that everyone can feel safe as they engage in the broadest range of Jewish life possible. And that together through our Live Secure campaign, we're working to make sure that the entire federation system has undertaken this task and that all of them can continue to upgrade their efforts to meet the new risks and adapt the newly developed best practices in security. What makes me an optimist is that thousands of people joined rallies against anti-Semitism sponsored by every major Jewish organization, online and in person, in every community. And the 250 members and alumni of our National Young Leadership Cabinet dropped everything and came to Washington, D.C. on short notice in the heat of the summer to raise the alarm about the rise in anti-Semitism. And that Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion is on the agenda of so many of our critical institutions. At this General Assembly, the 146 Jewish federations across North America are joined by our partners in Jewish life, the many lay leaders, funders, professionals, and organizations, global organizations, North American organizations, local organizations, with whom we work to make our communities run. We need you. You need us. And the Jewish people need us all. As we were reminded during the pandemic and during the attacks on Israel and on Jews in North America this past year, a community cannot rise to a crisis unless we have first built, invested in, and maintained the core infrastructure of Jewish communal life. So what's next? Well, in my humble opinion, what's next is a renewed commitment to community. There's really no such thing any longer as just a local program or just a global program. There's no such thing any longer as just a local donor or a global donor. Global programs thrive because they have local partners. Global donors will fail at their aspiration unless the community infrastructure is sound. No, it's not always being an optimist. It's not easy to build and maintain flourishing Jewish communities. Communities that are healthy, safe, caring, welcoming and inclusive, educated and engaged, involved in the broader society, and deeply connected to Israel and the global Jewish people. It's not easy when there are so many negative forces at work in the world and so many needs, but it is essential. On Rosh Hashanah, we read the words of the prophet Ezekiel, "V'hakimoti lach berit olam," I will establish with you an everlasting covenant. We in the Jewish Federation system reaffirm today and every day that this is so, that we have made an everlasting covenant to support and uplift our Jewish communities, so that we and the Jewish people may flourish today and forever. And so we shall go forward in this Jewish year 5782 and act with passion and urgency on the important agenda items to be discussed at this General Assembly and around each of our communal tables. Thank you for all you do to enable our communities to flourish and to fulfill their sacred purpose.
And now, please welcome Julie Platt, National Campaign Chair of the Jewish Federations of North America.
I'm Julie Platt from Los Angeles, the National Campaign Chair for the Jewish Federations of North America, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Last month, we commemorated the 20th anniversary of the horrific 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States, an event that transformed the way our communities think about security. But for me, the incident that changed the way I think about security happened 2 years prior. It was around lunchtime when I heard the news that a shooter with a semi-automatic weapon opened fire on the North Valley Jewish Community Center, not a half-hour drive from where I was. The shooter, who murdered one person and injured 5 more, including 3 children, said it was a wake-up call for Americans to kill Jews. That's when I started calling myself a security mom, a mother who refuses to let her kids live in fear, refuses to allow her community to be vulnerable to attack. With the leadership of Jewish Federations, security moms and others have been making a difference, creating a security network to keep our communities safe. To date, 45 federations have launched community security initiatives and are investing nearly $30 million per year in the security of their communal infrastructure. Together, we've advocated for government resources to help us secure our institutions and partnered with the Secure Community Network to provide best practices and guidance for Jewish communities across the continent. We've made great strides, but I'm sad to say that in the 22 years since that incident, the trouble for the Jewish community has not abated. In the last 3 years alone, we've lived through shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and the Chabad Synagogue in Poway, as well as anti-Semitic attacks in Muncie, Boston, and the streets of New York and Los Angeles. That's why the Jewish Federations of North America launched Live Secure, our initiative to broaden the security umbrella for Jewish communities across the country, bringing together private and public funds to keep us all safe. As the chair of Live Secure, I'm excited to announce a goal of expanding our security umbrella to include every single one of the 146 Jewish Federation communities. That will more than triple the current number of communities with comprehensive community security initiatives. And we want to help our existing security initiatives to upgrade and continually address emerging threats. To meet that target, we have a 2-phase campaign plan. First, we seek to raise $54 million at a system-wide level to help every federation build their security system with the expert help of the Secure Community Network over the next 3 years. Amazingly, through the incredible generosity of transformational funders, both national foundations and families from across the country who are investing in this work, we are nearly 2/3 of the way towards reaching that goal. Next, we will use these funds to help each community plan, grow, and raise the funds for the security initiatives they need to keep Jewish life flourishing. Joining me today to talk about the initiative are 3 distinguished leaders who played an important role in this groundbreaking new security campaign. Alisa Doctoroff is chair of the Jim Joseph Foundation and a former chair of the board of the UJA Federation of New York. We also have joining us Neil and Lisa Wallach, who between them have held just about every imaginable lay leader position in Boston's Federation, Combined Jewish Philanthropies. Neil is also the current secretary of the JFNA board and chairs our Impact and Growth Council. Welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today. Alisa, I'd love to start with you. The Jim Joseph Foundation's mission is to focus on Jewish education and engagement, but made a generous contribution to Live Secure. How does security align with your mission?
Thanks, Julie. It's good to be here with you today, talking about this very important initiative. You are correct. It is not in our mission specifically to deal with security. Our mission really is to foster compelling experiences for young Jews with a goal that Jews and their friends and their families are able to conduct meaningful and purpose-filled lives and make positive contributions, not only to our community, but to the communities beyond us. So it is a gray area, this idea of security. That said, unless Jews feel safe in those institutions and in those places where they can have those experiences, we will not be able to achieve our mission and our purpose. So, said another way, we want the fact that we want this generation to feel connection and purpose, and we, at the very base, need to make sure that they feel safe to achieve that.
Thank you so much, Elisa.
Sure.
Neil and Lisa, you have been strong and active leaders of your Jewish Federation in Boston. How do you see this system-wide Live Secure campaign benefiting local communities, and how does it impact local giving?
Thank you, Julie, for having us here today and for your leadership of the Live Secure campaign. We are just so grateful to you and to JFNA for this opportunity to help us strengthen the security of our local communities. We really see this as a yes and. This is an additive opportunity for our donors to invest in this meaningful way that will come back and have an incredible impact on our local communities as well as on the entire Jewish community throughout North America. We are incredibly excited to participate in this and think that this strategy will help to provide our donors with a meaningful way to have a real impact in an area that is obviously top of mind for each and every one of us who are engaging in Jewish life in all the meaningful, amazing ways that Elisa outlined.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Julie, for the opportunity to be here. I would add a couple of things. First of all, unfortunately, anti-Semitism does not know borders or boundaries. It could happen anywhere. And as you alluded to earlier, Julie, we have experienced that recently here in Boston. But we're equally affected if anti-Semitism happens elsewhere in the United States or abroad. It affects all of us, and it creates a lasting impact and trend. So we need to find ways to address this for communities that might not have the resources that a Boston or a Los Angeles or a New York may have, where these things may occur. And so what really needs to be put in place and be continue to be built from what we have today is a system-wide infrastructure that provides training, that provides resources, that provides information and best practices, that creates ways to work on social media and other forms of advocacy. And that's exactly what we're doing here to build on the work that's already been done. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to invest in this effort.
Thank you so much. This question is, yes.
I just want to add something, which is that I think we feel very strongly that we needed to be participants in this effort, that this is something that affects the entire Jewish community, and that we are the health and the safety of the Jewish community is, a basic, fundamental issue that we need to ensure before anything else good can happen in the Jewish community.
Thank you. I certainly agree with you, Elisa. One more question for all three of you. The current challenges we are facing as a community come after another challenging period of the pandemic. What learnings in philanthropy might we take from the pandemic as we navigate Live Secure and other initiatives aimed at responding to the challenges of the day? Elisa, I'll start with you.
Okay. So I think one of the positive things that has come out of the experience of the pandemic is that many foundations and federations and other organizations in the Jewish community came together to address some of the biggest challenges, the crises that different organizations were facing. And I think one of the things we learned from coming together to address those is that together we can have a better, more coordinated, smarter, and more effective impact on the problem at hand. So actually, JF&A was instrumental in working together with Jim Joseph Foundation and a series of other foundations on something that's called JCRIF, the Jewish Community Response and Impact Fund. And together we worked on the crises that were affecting the Jewish community centers and the Jewish day schools and the Jewish camps. So across sectors, we were working together in order to address the issues affecting them. And I think that's been enormously impactful and effective. And I think the same is true for this effort, that we need to make sure that we are coordinated. It is a massive issue and it affects all of us. And if we are coordinated, through the efforts of JF&A, I think we will come out with a better product. We will come out with in a better situation for the community at large.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I think, like with the pandemic, the challenges facing the Jewish community and the need for security is a huge additional responsibility. It's something that transcends any of the divides that may exist within members of the community politically or otherwise. It's something that we really need to all rally together and join forces in order to support. And we also learned from the pandemic that thanks to strategic initiatives like this one, people will step up, they will rise to the occasion and take advantage of the opportunity to have an impact. And so I think that we're providing a very meaningful way for people to do something about something that's causing them a great deal of concern. And I'm confident that the community will step up again like they did in helping us to get through the pandemic.
And I just add one thing to what Elisa and Lisa said, which is referenced that if there's a well-envisioned plan, that you have folks in place that you trust to implement it, and there are well-defined goals and measurable outcomes that you could both look to and adjust to as you need to, there are resources out there. I think that's exactly, Julie, the effort that you're trying to coordinate on behalf of JF&A. We're so appreciative of that in partnership with SCAN. And we think there's a great ability to have success in fighting a true scourge here. So thank you.
Thank you to all three of you. Thank you so much for being here and for your support of this incredible initiative. Our community, locally, continentally, and globally, is enriched by the strong commitment and leadership of exemplary leaders like the three of you. You have all given me even more to be proud of and inspired by. The power of collective action and collective giving has sustained our community throughout our history, and it will continue to carry us through as we navigate what's next. Thank you.
We are now honored to welcome the President of the State of Israel, His Excellency, Isaac Herzog.
Dear friends, it is a great honor for me to address this year's General Assembly from the heart of Jerusalem, and I'm delighted to join you this morning for the first time as the President of the State of Israel. I must say, after 3 years of working side by side with the Jewish Federations of North America as chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, this feels a little bit like a homecoming. The close partnership I shared with Mark Wilf, JF&A's chair of the Board of Trustees, and with Eric Fingerhut, JF&A president and CEO, and their team, was always both productive and enjoyable. Friends, nearly 2 years into the existential state of distance, Israel and North American Jewry, both modern-day marvels, face their own version of the same unnerving question: what's next? The first answer leaves me optimistic. In viewing this distinguished forum of leaders, volunteers, dedicated staff of all ages from the myriad of organizations all across America, it is clear to me that 20+ months of COVID have inadvertently reaffirmed the deep significance of community, the unique strength of the established Jewish organizations, and the power of solidarity. We have witnessed the extreme relevance of the federation system, otherwise taken for granted, but during the pandemic, absolutely critical for survival of so many Jewish communities. We have encountered the wealth of experience, knowledge, and resources which enables the well-established organizations to prove their unparalleled value with the community. We saw JFNA exhibit outstanding leadership on a national level and step up for the collective at a time when strong leadership was urgently needed. This is not praise, this is fact. The organized Jewish community rallied and moved beyond its comfort zone. We saw this all over North America, Europe, Latin America, and other parts of the world. The categorical value of the federation system, mostly for individuals in need, at times Jew and non-Jew alike, as much as for families and congregations and establishments, became more visible than ever. I applaud my friends in each of the federations for your inspirational work on behalf of the Jewish collective. The mesirut nefesh, what we say in Hebrew, self-sacrifice you've displayed will not be forgotten. At the same time, as we contemplate what's next for the future of the Jewish community outside the tight circle or the core commitment to Jewish peoplehood is under threat. No matter how we break down the numbers, there is no doubt that being Jewish and love of Israel is becoming a challenging, complex issue for some in the young generation of North American Jews. It is almost too painful to express aloud, but an increasing number of young Jews no longer feel a bond with the Jewish collective. Too many American Jewish youth are disinterested in what's being Jewish means and in the complex understanding of the realities and challenges facing Israel. Some of them, a very small minority, are too willing to accept distorted labels and libels against the Jewish state. At the same time, on the other side of the ocean, far too many Israelis show little interest in Jewish life outside of Israel and lack a nuanced understanding of their sisters and brothers in the diaspora. Here, we are among friends. So let me be clear. As I have repeatedly stated in numerous occasions, the two epic centers of Jewish life, what I term as Jerusalem and Babylon, are under threat of growing apart. Right now, today, we must declare our urgent duty and overarching goal to strengthen our shared sense of peoplehood, to enhance and deepen the links between us. I cannot imagine a world in which Israel and North American Jewry are not intimately tied to each other. And I say this at a time when many Jews face hatred and anti-Semitism also in the United States. I cannot imagine a Jewish people who are not responsible for each other, a people whose prayers do not include each other, for whom the axiom of Kol Yisrael Arevin Ze Bazeh is hollow. I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine a Jewish world vacant of community and solidarity. I cannot imagine a world in which Jews in North America are fearful of living publicly as Jews and experience attacks and intimidation at times in their colleges, at times in their synagogues and elsewhere, and the Jewish collective, as well as Israelis, do not feel compelled to act immediately on their behalf. Just as I cannot imagine a world in which the existence of Israel is questioned and American Jews do not defend the state of Israel. I cannot imagine a world in which the two epic centers of Judaism function in solitude and disconnect, without working to build bridges back to each other. This is the main crux of my message today. We must all act together. We have the leadership, we have the strength, the resources, the structure to overcome any setbacks. And we must do this. As President of the State of Israel, I will make it my mission to strengthen the lines of communication, to reinforce the underlying bond and mutual responsibility. As President, I will act in every group, every individual, every denomination to ensure that North American Jewry knows that Israel is your home away from home, and to ensure that the Israeli people accept and respect every Jewish voice. As in any extended family, there are differences of opinion, style, and substance. But I'm confident in our ability to reverse this tide, both because we share history and values, and because of the close partnership which I was privileged to experience over the past few years with the Jewish Federations of North America and the Jewish Agency for Israel. Yes, dear friends, the challenges are tremendous, but the vision for overcoming them is equally great. And preserving the bond of our peoplehood is the key to a Jewish future. This is the challenge of our generation. Friends, my sisters and brothers in North America, the Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers, what we call Pirkei Avot, teaches us it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, ולא אתה בן חורין לבטל ממנה. This is our watch, and we must assume responsibility for our Jewish future. So what's next? As a question, we must work together. First, to deepen our mutual understanding by educating ourselves about each other, beginning by simply meeting each other. Hundreds of shlichim, emissaries, who are annually dispatched from Israel all across the world, bring their own take of Israel to the diaspora, and are rewarded with a personalized introduction to communities they never heard or knew before. Second, trips to Israel, what we call Israel experiences, whether long or short, Masa, Taglit, Onward, and so forth, provide diaspora Jewry with a real Israel experience of all facets. Teen travel is an important tool which needs to be encouraged. Third, programs such as the Jewish Agency's Partnership Together, Peoplehood Platform, or the new innovative informal Hebrew language education which summer camps throughout North America experienced this last summer. These are but a few prime examples of avenues, many avenues, of promoting curiosity, connectivity, love of Israel, fact-based understandings, and the life of the others in other communities. Fourth, we must educate generations of young Israelis about the Jewish story by exposing them to the diaspora in all of its facets. Fifth, we must stand together against the threat of rising anti-Semitism from all extremes. We must build alliances with other communities that have been the targets of hate, and we must ensure that Jews are safe to be Jews in America and elsewhere around the world. From the depth of my heart, I believe that if we remain committed to our shared peoplehood, joined by bonds mighty enough to withstand the winds and storms of disagreement, we will be able to change the tide, to strengthen Jewish identity and peoplehood, and seize tremendous opportunities together. We can and must do this together. Toda Rabba, dear friends. Thank you, my friends. Thank you, JFNA leadership, for all that you have done and for all that you will be doing for Israel and the Jewish people. I am excited to continue working together to build a bright, vibrant, and secure Jewish future. I wish you all a Shana Tova, a year of health, peace, working together, and lots of Ahavat Israel, love of Israel. Stay safe. Thank you all, and looking forward to seeing you soon in Israel. Toda Rabba.
Welcome back, Anne and Jeremy Pava.
Before we close today's program with one last song, we want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you so much to all of today's presenters who are leaving us with so much to think about as we move forward. I hope you have found it as meaningful as we have.
Despite the continued uncertainty that lays ahead, we know that as a community, through our collective action, we have the potential to do so much. I am confident that we have the capacity to build a just, diverse, and inclusive society for all, while we safeguard and build a flourishing Jewish community in North America, Israel, and around the world. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all in person, God willing, next year.
To close today's program, we are now excited to welcome the Andinet Band of the Jewish Agency for Israel's Haruv Absorption Center in Beersheba.
Well, I heard there was a secret chord that David played, now please the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do ya? Well, it goes like this, the 4th, the 5th, the might fall, and the major lift, the baffled king composed it, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah,
אני אסתפסה לו כמץ בבית, וסתם דם סמאי נגר